I'm a female living in New England. This took place several years ago in a decent neighborhood the day before my 10th birthday. I was arriving home with my mother and my younger brother from one of his soccer games. When we pulled in, my brother noticed a yard sale next door. This house was run down. Apparently some police activity went on there before I was born, but that was over with now, right? A man walks up to us and introduces himself. We'll call him Ray. Now, Ray was renting from the woman who owned the place. Basically, this woman had a house with 4 bedrooms, one for her disabled son, and the other 2 rooms were rented out. Ray seemed nice. He played a bit of soccer on the sidewalk with my younger brother and spoke kindly with my mother. He looked a bit trashy, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go inside and play some Minecraft, not thinking much about the ordeal. That was in October. A few months later, in late January, I was barely awake when my dad came into my room and picked me up out of bed and carried me to the master bedroom where my mom and brother were. The master bedroom is the furthest room away from the house next door. I didn't like being disturbed, so I ran back to my bedroom. My dad then yelled at me, saying that there were police next door and that I should go back into the other room. I did as I was told. I was scared. Apparently, Ray's ex had gone over to the house to pick up some of her things, and she brought her new boyfriend along with her. Ray started stabbing the boyfriend and the police were called, guns drawn and all. I thought that was a one-time instance and that we would be safe after that. March rolls around. My mom picked me up from school as usual. My brother was staying after school for some guitar lessons. She would get him later. I threw my backpack in the trunk, and I asked her why there were so many suitcases back there. She cheerfully explained that we were staying at a hotel for the night. We drove around town, and finally she said my dad would take me back home. And suddenly we were no longer staying at a hotel. I thought all of this was very strange. I came home with my dad. I noticed that there was police tape on our lawn. My dad said that they had found drugs in Ray's house. That comment didn't really settle in until later. The full story was, Ray was doing PCP on his front steps. Someone noticed and called the cops. The police came, half-chased Ray into the next town over, investigated the house. An officer picked up a package with drugs and immediately begins to have a bad reaction. A biohazard unit had to be called, and they found a drug lab inside the house. The police advised my parents to evacuate. It turns out it wasn't meth, so we could come back. But he was manufacturing PCP right next door. My mom arrives home with my brother a few hours after me and Dad, and that's when reality sets in. I had an anxiety attack. I couldn't eat, and I sat behind our couch, using it as a makeshift bunker. I couldn't get any sleep on that night. After Ray was released from jail, he goes right back to his illegal lifestyle. Apparently the evidence room was tampered with, so he couldn't be convicted. Meanwhile, my family has bought a new house, a large dog, security cameras, and plenty of weapons. My brother and I were already attending therapy, but now our sessions happen to be more frequent. We would be moving out in 2 months. During this time, Ray would watch us from his back porch, just sitting there and staring at us. My dad confronted him once and Ray started shouting death threats at him, which upset me even more. The day we moved, Ray let his pit bull loose. It was in the evening, and he didn't know that we had already left. He just knew it was around the time that we usually walked our dog. A month after moving out, Ray strolled into a local food store. Jacked up on PCP, he tried to kidnap a small child. Thankfully, the kid's parents noticed. Ray dropped the child and tried to hide, but the police eventually caught up with him. But here's a real kicker. He was released from jail a month later because the cells were too full. No transfers, nothing. It was like he was acquitted of all charges. In legal terms, I'm not sure what the outcome of this whole ordeal was, but if he was capable of kidnapping, what could he have done to me or my younger brother? I have pushed this from the back of my mind in the past couple of months because any activity has seemingly stopped. Yet somehow I knew this silence was too good to be true, and eventually we would hear from him again, sooner or later. It all started a few months ago. A guy messaged me on Facebook, and unlike the usual creepy messages I get, this one sounded intelligent and funny. We started chatting from time to time, talking about anything and everything. He said he was divorced with one child, and I kinda empathized every time he would complain about his ex-wife, even though it also kinda bothered me that he would tell all of these personal details to a virtual stranger. After all, no matter what happened between them, she was still the mother of his kid. Please have some respect. We continued chatting, and I'm getting more relaxed. We were at the stage where we would often discuss our daily lives, and inevitably, I talked about my best friend, with whom I'm extremely close with. We were like sisters, but at that particular time she was very busy with changes happening at her work. She was also having issues with a guy she had met, and things were complicated, and she promised me that she would explain everything in detail when there was more time to meet. Now keep in mind that under normal circumstances I would have known every little detail about it, but as it happened then, there wasn't sufficient time to properly see each other and talk, so I only knew the basics, no names or pictures, etc. So I'm talking to, for the sake of the story, we'll just call him Jake, and I'm beginning to notice that every time we have a conversation, he would casually direct the discussion towards my best friend. We'll call her Jenna. I have mentioned to him that we've known each other since we were babies and practically grew up together, so he would always ask me to tell him funny stories about our childhood and our teenage years, then proceeded inquiring about what she's like now and what kind of guy she goes for, etc. I would jokingly ask if he got tired of me, would he want her number, but he would deflect with awkward humor, so I didn't really read too much into it. Some time had passed, and things are a bit calmer at Jenna's work, so we finally got a chance to meet up for drinks. Inevitably, we start talking about Jake. I told her about him, and she's smiling and nodding, until I take out my phone and show her his pictures. Her face goes pale. She grabs my phone and says, "This is him. This is the guy I told you about." At first I assumed that she was joking. She is prone to messing with me. But she looks dead serious, so I began asking questions. It turns out, she met him on a dating app. And when they talked, she was under the same impression that I was, that he was smart, charming, and cultured. So when he eventually asked her out, she gladly accepted. They went out, had some drinks, and talked, and everything was fine. Until by the end of the evening, when he got a bit too grabby with her and was insistent for more than just a goodnight kiss. He offered to drive her home, even though she had taken her own car there, and suggested that he could pick her up in the morning and they could go back together and get her car. Since Jenna didn't want him to know where she stayed, she was annoyed by his advances. She refused and managed to escape him somehow. She told me that she was afraid that Jake would follow her home, so instead, she went to a bar where a friend of hers worked at. The next day, he called her and apologized for his behavior, blaming it on the alcohol and the stress from his job, and then told her that he had to admit something to her because he really liked her and wanted to be honest. She agreed and they met up again. That's when he admitted that he was actually in the process of getting a divorce but hadn't filed for it yet. And he was still living with his wife and small child because she didn't have a job and he couldn't just leave her alone. This was only a temporary thing until she got financially stable. Jenna, being the blunt girl that she is, called bullshit on his story and accused him of being yet another married man out to cheat on his wife and using false excuses for sympathy. The guy worked in sales, so he was really smooth talking and convincing. So I don't know how he managed to appease her doubts, at least to the point of not cutting him off right then and there. But some time passes and he chats to her online, calls her, and they talk. But Jenna tells him that the only way that they would ever be intimate with each other is that she sees proof that he is actually divorced and lives separately from his ex-wife. One day he calls her up and tells her that he will put his wife on the phone to prove, even though they live together, they sleep in separate rooms and are technically separated. A woman's voice actually confirms that. But this leaves Jenna more puzzled than reassured. She's conflicted because despite everything, she really likes this guy. Why? And is therefore worried not to get herself into a mess if she falls deeper. She's still hesitant to accept his invitations to meet. So one day he accidentally walks past her workplace at exactly the time she's done with her shift. What are the chances, right? She agrees to go grab a drink with him, as long as they act platonic. He promises. And apparently that is also when she tells him more about her life, childhood, etc. And that's where I'm brought up in that conversation. He listens to her carefully, and when she compares both timelines, it turns out a few days after that, Jake begins to message me on Facebook. We were both livid, so we decided to confront him separately and then compare notes. When I got back home, I texted him asking why he had lied to me about being divorced, when he was clearly still living with his family, and more importantly, why he even started talking to me when he was apparently seeing my best friend. He was unprepared for that, but he bounced back and gave me some bullshit excuse about how he was just curious about me, when he had heard so much from Jenna, and wanted to see what I looked like. So he went through her Facebook friends and found me. Mind you, she hadn't added him on Facebook, so he basically stalked her profile to gather that information. Just like when she didn't tell him exactly where she worked, yet he had accidentally, by some miracle, walked past there. When Jenna confronted him, he told her that he was just curious and wanted to hear about her from the person who knows her best. She told him that it was wrong and creepy on so many levels, but he insisted that he had no bad intentions, and he just allowed his curiosity to get the better of him, etc. When we compared notes after that, Jenna and I just decided to stop talking to him altogether, because this guy was clearly a pathological liar and also extremely creepy. We each tell him that we don't want to talk to him or see him ever again, and even though he was shocked and tries to convince us otherwise, he eventually accepts that and says that if we ever change our mind, he'll be happy to talk. We think it's over. Oh, how naive we were. At first, he seemed to take it well, but then he would again, quote, accidentally send a picture or message that was intended for somebody else, but mistakenly sent it to me or Jenna, so he could initiate a conversation. He would attempt to ask her or me out again, get denied, and then retreat again until the next message or call. Then the random bumping into each other ensued. Whenever we would go out, on my way to work, or to the market, to the cafe, or Jenna's gym, he would be there. Of course, all of this was random coincidence. We were more annoyed than scared at this point. We still thought he was a lying piece of shit, but ultimately harmless. So there wasn't much that we could do, except wait it out and hope that he would eventually move on. Wrong. One day Jenna comes to my place, freaked out. She tells me that she was on a date with a new guy, and she saw Jake passing by the restaurant she was in. and then later called her in hysterics, screaming at her. "Look what you did. I can't get you out of my mind. Because of you, I got so angry I hit my child and chased my wife out of the house." She got fed up with him and responded, and told him to never bother her again, and go seek a therapist because he clearly has issues, and then she blocked him. That creeped us both out, because not only was he not moving on, he seemed to have been escalating and becoming aggressive. I told her that if he calls her again, she should threaten to call the police and report him for being allegedly abusive toward his family. We were in the middle of discussing this when I got a call from an unknown number. I normally don't pick those up, but I was also waiting for a package to be dropped off and thought that it might be the delivery man, but it was Jake. He was crying into the phone, sobbing and pleading with me to convince Jenna to unblock him, that it wasn't fair and I had to help him. He sounded insane. I was shocked to hear him in this state. It was such a contrast to his normally smooth demeanor. So I calmly told him to start acting like a grown man and to calm down. It wasn't my place to convince Jenna of anything after she had made up her mind, especially after him acting crazy and the claims about hitting his child and chasing his wife out. He then told me that he didn't really do that, but just wanted to make Jenna feel guilty and scare her into talking to him. He began to apologize profusely and said that he was at his wit's end and didn't know what to do. I told him that he had gone way too far and that if he ever proceeded to contact or stalk us again, we would go to the police. I hung up on him and blocked him as well. The police threat seemed to work, and we haven't heard from him in about 2 months. But yesterday, Jenna and I were at a mutual friend's birthday party, and guess who was the birthday girl's +1? Here's some background information to give you a bit of understanding of what my life was like back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I grew up in a very dysfunctional household. My parents hated each other, and both my extended and immediate family were plagued by mental illness and drug addiction. So needless to say, I was a very anxious child who was drawn to unstable people, and it goes without saying that they were drawn to me as well. I was a shy 11-year-old girl who, like many others before me, used the internet as a way to vent my frustrations. This was the time where AOL was still the main source of communication. I was no stranger to this, along with MySpace and Facebook. However, I wasn't like the typical preteens of my era, or so I thought. I kept all my profiles private and never accepted a friend request from anyone I didn't know, and never shared my location on these said profiles. This is the part where I introduce Tanya. Tanya isn't her real name, of course. I don't want to use her real name in case she happens to read this thread, watches a YouTube channel, or listens to a podcast. We met in elementary school, at one of the points in my life where my family situation was quite volatile, and in retrospect, I think she could pick up on this. I was vulnerable, and Tanya took advantage of my innocence. She never really displayed any signs of her true intentions at the beginning, as sociopaths never usually do. She would do shady things every now and again, manipulate me into begging my mom to stay on the computer until the wee hours of the morning so we could go on not safe for work websites. She once ghosted me when I didn't give her my favorite pen. She yelled at me when I couldn't perfect a guitar solo on Guitar Hero. These were the early warning signs. She did some other things to me that I believe my mind blocked out due to trauma. My mom didn't like her either. Parents always have this weird intuition when it comes to friends, and I wish to God I would have listened to my mom before Tanya did what she did. Tanya's behavior changed for the worse when I turned 11. She was openly jealous of my success in school. Granted, she was incredibly smart herself, but she always made it a point to mock me for having great grades. and would always comment since, quote, I wasn't pretty enough. Having good grades would be a nice balance, end quote. Real classy, right? It took me a while to build my self-esteem. After all the snide remarks she would make about my weight and my face. As a result of all of her jealousy and growing resentment towards me, she began to plot my downfall. I make no exaggeration either. This girl literally tried to ruin my self-worth even more than she already had. It all started in middle school. Tanya and I were remarkably close that year, and I wanted to do everything together with her. We would talk all day in school, and would chat all night on Instant Messenger. On one particular evening, Tanya and I were talking about boys, being that we were in the hormonal preteen stage. Our conversations would usually turn into who we liked in school that day. Being that I had a horrible relationship with my own father, I didn't really trust boys. From an early age, it was rare if I ever developed a crush on one. I remember Tanya and I's conversations went a little something like this. Do you know Mark? The kid in my class? Yeah, why? I heard he likes you. What? No way. Totally. He told me himself. Do you want me to talk to him and maybe give him your username? Yeah, of course. Thank you, Tanya. My heart was racing. A boy liked me? Impossible. When Tanya told me that she would give Mark my username, I nearly exploded in my seat. 11-year-old me could not believe I was going to have an actual, real boyfriend. Oh boy, how wrong I was. Fast forward to the next night. I was getting ready for bed when I heard the famous AOL notification.
You've got mail.
When I checked the notification, it was a message from MarkyBoy99. Tanya really talked to Mark and gave him my username. She was truly the best. He messaged me with the usual, "Hey." I responded, "Hey." Not even a minute later, he messaged me back, and we talked all night about everything. Our days, how school was, what type of silly bands we liked, typical 11-year-old stuff. I have to admit that I was smitten right off the bat. I think it was partially because I never really had a boy that liked me before, and another part of me being that my self-esteem was so low that I never thought anyone would be capable of liking me. Also, it could have been because Mark was one of the most popular boys in school at the time. He played football, was mouthy towards the teachers, and was extremely outgoing. All the things a young girl would be attracted to. We talked for months, my puppy love growing for him more and more every time we chatted. Of course, I never spoke to him on the phone, nor did I get his phone number, because why do that, right? While I was speaking to him, Tanya would tell me how proud she was of me, and that I deserved a boyfriend. My suspicions of Mark only began to grow when I attempted to approach him during school hours. Again, I had bad anxiety and never really spoke to Mark outside of Instant Messenger. When I went to talk to him, Mark looked confused, as if he had never had a conversation with me before in his life. He turned away from me on the playground and walked over to his group of friends. Weird. This wasn't like him. He was usually so chatty with me online that I expected him to welcome me with open arms. My ego was bruised. My 11-year-old mind tried to rationalize this behavior by chalking it up to him not wanting to be seen talking to the nerdy girl since he was so popular, and just preferred to keep our relationship online. I told Tanya the news, and she seemed to be genuinely heartbroken for me. She was just as angry as I was, and vowed to confront Mark later that day during music class. I was happy. I thought Tanya had my back, and as far as I knew, she was going to tell Mark off about him being a total jerk to me. Well, it worked. Later that night, I got a message from Mark telling me about how sorry he was for ignoring me, and that he was just going through some family things. Well, I fell back in love. I didn't care that Mark ignored me during school. I didn't care about him rejecting my advances in person. As long as he would talk to me online, and as long as I had Tanya's support, I would be fine. I even told my mom about him, and she was extremely happy for me as well. Another month passed. This was March 31st. Mark messaged me and told me that he had something very important to tell me the next day. My anxiety began to act up again. What could it be? At that point, I considered myself and Mark to be dating. So I was scared that he was either going to break it off with me or that he was just going to make us public in school the next day. I told my mom and Tanya, almost on the verge of tears of how excited and nervous I was. Well, the next day, April 1st, rolled around, and this is what followed. It was around 7 p.m., and I was on Club Penguin when I heard a familiar sound.
You've got mail.
It was Mark. It was time for the big news I have been waiting for all day. Hey, babe. Hey, I've been waiting for you to chat me all night. Sorry about that, I was at practice. Are you ready for the news? I was shaking in anticipation at this point. Even writing this now, a whole slew of emotions are resurfacing. Yes, of course. It was then that Mark sent me a picture. I opened it up, but only... It wasn't Mark. It was Tanya, and she was holding a handwritten sign that said, "Happy April Fool's Day." At first, I started laughing. And I mean, it was an ugly laugh. Of course, it was a prank. Tanya had got me so good, right? Right? It was only then, when the realization hit me, that I began to cry. I felt so betrayed. Tanya had been behind Mark all along, and she had been planning this big joke since last October. She had been so jealous of me that she pretended to be somebody else and string me along, and she knew that I was already in a rough place mentally. Tanya had been at this for 6 months. An 11-year-old girl plotted and tricked me into believing that I had a boyfriend, all the while telling me she was happy for me and that Mark and I were a cute couple. I told my mom. She told Tanya's mom about what her daughter had done and to never speak to me again. I was crushed. My own best friend of 3 years had catfished me because she simply wanted to play a joke. I was loyal to her, and she toyed with my emotions. In the months that followed, leading into 7th grade, Tanya tried multiple times to guilt trip me into being her friend again. One of the more memorable and honestly messed up times being that she messaged me a few days after my birthday in August to tell me that her mother had died in a horrible car crash. Her body was dismembered, and that they could only find her head and wedding ring. As anyone would be, I was in tears. Tanya's mother was nothing but loving towards me, and learning that she had died in such a violent way crushed my soul. I started talking to Tanya again, asking her when her mother's funeral would be. Tanya then revealed to me seconds later, after speaking to her about the grisly details over her mom's death, that she was just kidding and was pranking me again, and that I was stupid to believe her. She even sent a video of her laughing at me. I was disgusted. What kind of now 12-year-old would make something like that up about their own mother? Tanya revealed her evil intentions at the beginning of 7th grade. She had become friends with a girl named Kaylee. They both invited me to sit with them at lunch because I was desperate for friends. I stupidly accepted, only to be met with hordes of insults and laughter behind my back. Tanya then messaged me one night telling me to end my own life, and that the world would be a much better place without me in it. She also had Kaylee tell me to jump off a bridge. Tanya told me that she hated me, and she was never really my friend to begin with. that I deserved all the pain that she had put me through the year prior. Again, I turned to my mom, who then called the police. She had enough of Tanya, and so had I. For 4 years, I had to put up with Tanya's malicious behavior, and I mentally couldn't handle it anymore. My mom had me delete my AOL account, and Tanya's mom told her to never contact me again. I was also advised to move lunch tables, but I was hell-bent on not allowing Tanya to win. For the remainder of 7th grade, I sat at the same table as Tanya, only I spoke to my friends on the other side of the table. I never spoke to her, looked at her, or gave her any sort of attention. Kaylee was scared to death of me afterward, as the police had gotten in contact with her family as well. It's been 10 years, and I still haven't spoken to Tanya. I'm now 22 years old, and I have 2 bachelor's degrees, one in psychology and the other in history. I am now working towards my master's in clinical social work. Tanya has done more than what is mentioned here. I could write a whole other story about it, but I think writing this would help give me some closure on the part of my childhood that has scared me for years. I thank God for my mom stepping in when she did, because I don't know where I would be without her. As for Tanya, I really don't know what ever became of her. On the off chance she stumbles upon this story, I have a message for her. Your jealousy and wishes for death upon me did not win, and I truly hope karma does not come around one day to bite you in the ass.